My life ended as a bored, lonely gemologist and woke up as a breathtaking, penniless aristocrat. My new life's motto? I will never be poor again. I became an elite jewel thief with a dangerous secret. I can hear the magic inside gemstones. People lie. Stones never do. My talents earned me a meeting with a dangerous shadow broker. The deal was simple: steal an enchanted artifact called Pandora's Box from a high society auction and get the legendary diamond of my dreams. Fail, and I won't get a third chance. My plan was flawless: grab the box and vanish into the night. But my grand design didn't account for one terrifyingly handsome, arrogant billionaire standing in my way: Christian Van der Berg. I stepped into the grand hall, my eyes locking onto the ornate box, and instantly knew exactly who would take it home. Christian Van der Berg, 30 years old, billionaire, a man who collects priceless art simply to fill the void where his soul should be. He discards women faster than vintage pocket squares. Diagnosis: a hopelessly spoiled narcissist. He didn't even bother participating in the bidding war. He simply raised his paddle. 5 million. The auctioneer's gavel fell with a sharp crack. Sold. I let out a soft, mocking scoff. Sweet little rich boy playing with daddy's money. You won't even realize I've robbed you blind until I'm already gone. Suddenly, he looked up, our eyes locked across the crowded room. A single, breathless second. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. How fascinating. Very fascinating. The plan was deliciously simple. He wins the prize, I take it from him. My finger brushed the hidden button on my diamond bracelet. The grand chandeliers were supposed to shatter into darkness. Let the games begin.
A sudden burst of static crackled in my earpiece. Sorry, Viv, they've installed a new magical warding system. I can't break through it. I closed my eyes, taking a slow, calming breath. You promised me everything was under control. It was, but they upgraded the... I pulled the earpiece out with a sharp tug. If you want something done flawlessly, you do it yourself. I dropped the tiny device into a passing waiter's champagne flute, watching it sink among the golden bubbles. Plan A was officially dead. Meanwhile, across the room, Christian was already accepting handshakes and fawning congratulations. The enchanted box was being carefully wrapped away. I was left with two choices: fade into the shadows and disappear, or get closer. I chose the latter. If I couldn't steal it in the darkness, I would just have to steal it from his bedroom. The plan changes. The underground parking garage. The faint, rhythmic sound of pouring rain echoing from outside. I stood by his sleek, black Maybach, looking like a lost, beautiful creature who had accidentally wandered into a world of luxury. Footsteps. He approaches, calm, radiating quiet confidence, the ultimate victor. I turned around, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. Congratulations, I murmured. You just walked away with the only thing I flew to this city for. His gaze swept over me, an intense, calculating look that seemed to pierce right through my facade and into my soul. I know how to share, he replied, his voice a dark velvet purr. If the prize is worth it, get in. The damp air will ruin your dress. I slipped into the leather seat. He actually thinks he's the hunter. How incredibly endearing. His penthouse, bathed in twilight, with sweeping, dizzying views of the glittering city skyline. Everything was devastatingly expensive, flawlessly clean, and completely, utterly lonely. He walked over to the crystal decanter and poured 2 glasses of amber whiskey. To a beautiful evening, he toasted. The moment he turned his back, I slipped a pinch of shimmering dream dust into his glass. No hesitation, not a single tremble in my fingers. He returned, raising the heavy crystal glass to the light, and to beautiful eyes that never lie. He took a sip. 1 heartbeat, 2. The fierce clarity in his eyes began to cloud over as the magic took hold. With a heavy thud, he collapsed onto the plush rug. I stepped gracefully over his unconscious form, not even bothering to look back.
Sweet dreams, Casanova. You were far too easy. I turned my gaze toward the prize and walked straight for Pandora's box.
I reached for Pandora's box. It was heavy, strangely warm to the touch. It almost felt like it was pulsating. The lock was ancient. No mechanical gears, no keypad. I pressed my thumb against the seal. Click. A sharp spark of energy bit into my finger. Damn it! The pain was sharp, like a viper's strike. I slammed the lid shut. There was no time to figure this out. I had to go. I spun around, stepping past his unconscious body, but my hip accidentally brushed against his arm. Crack. A blinding flash of blue light erupted. I was thrown violently backward against the wall, the breath knocked completely out of my lungs. What on earth? I scrambled to my feet and sprinted toward the private elevator. 1 step, 2, 3. A sudden, heart-wrenching agony twisted through my entire body. It felt like my very essence was being torn apart. My skin burned. I collapsed to my knees. No, no. I dragged myself backward, inching closer to him. Instantly, the pain subsided. I froze. I tested the boundary, pulling away again. The burning agony returned. 5 meters. That was the absolute limit. I was magically bound. To him. To this smug, arrogant billionaire currently passed out on his expensive rug. Brilliant, Vivian. He woke up slowly, groaning, squinting, rubbing his temples, and then his eyes locked onto me. Guards, get this lunatic out of my penthouse. I didn't even flinch. Try it yourself, Casanova, but I'd highly recommend wearing rubber gloves. He stood up, towering over me, and took a threatening step forward. He suddenly stopped, flinching as if struck by an invisible current. What the? He tried again. Spark. Crackle. The magic repelled us, forcing us both to jump back from one another. 2 burly security guards burst through the doors. The men lunged, grabbing my arms. Crack. A massive shockwave blasted them backward, sending them crashing to the floor so hard the chandelier flickered. Christian stared at me as if I had just blown up his most prized vault. Explain, right now. Without a word, I took a deliberate step toward the door. The agonizing, magical burn flared in my chest. I stopped dead in my tracks. He noticed my wince. He took a step closer to me. The pain faded into a dull, tolerable ache. He let out a slow, exasperated breath. Are you kidding me? I wish I were. The terrifying truth dawned on both of us. I couldn't leave. He couldn't get rid of me. I need a shower, he announced coldly. Congratulations, I'm not your security team. You don't need to report your schedule to me. He slid open the glass door of the luxurious walk-in shower. You're not going anywhere. We've already established that. The water turned on, sending a thick cloud of steam billowing against the glass. I stood with my back pressed against the frosted wall, hovering exactly on the 5-meter boundary line. His voice cut through the sound of rushing water. Do you have any idea how pathetic you look right now? I only brought you here out of pity. I thought I'd give a poor, pretty girl a taste of the high life. Pity? Please. You were looking at me like you wanted to devour me. Don't turn around, little thief. I'd hate for you to be blinded by my sheer perfection. Don't flatter yourself. I've appraised far more impressive jewels. Silence. Only the sound of water cascading down the glass. You spelled my drink, he said, his tone suddenly dangerously calm. You drank it completely of your own free will. You tried to rob me. You bought something that rightfully belongs to me. The water shut off. And now what happens? He asked. I shrugged at the empty room. Now? We're cursed roommates. He stepped out of the shower, wrapping a white towel low around his hips. He stopped just a few steps away from me. I could feel the tension radiating off him. This wasn't the magical tether. This was pure, undeniable chemistry. If this is some elaborate joke, it's gone on entirely too long, he murmured. Believe me, I'd heavily prefer a joke. He took a step closer, and I didn't back away. Suddenly, he was much too close. So close I could feel the damp heat of his skin through the misty air. You are a problem, Vivienne. I've always been one. He slowly raised his arm, pressing his palm flat against the frosted glass just above my head, cutting off my escape. The classic kabedan. Now I was truly trapped, not by magic, but by him. You hustled your way into my home, you spelled my drink, you tried to steal my prize, and now... He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. Now you are forced to live within my radius. I could feel the ghost of his breath against the sensitive skin of my neck. I tilted my chin up defiantly. Don't flatter yourself, darling. You're trapped in mine.
He insisted I accompany him to his corporate headquarters. Not out of trust, of course, out of sheer, unadulterated control. I was currently lounging in his custom leather office chair, my legs propped up on his massive mahogany desk, loudly crunching on a crisp green apple. He was busy reviewing contracts. Suddenly, the heavy double doors swung open. In walked a model, legs for days, a skirt shorter than my patience, and an IQ hovering somewhere around absolute zero. "Christian," she purred, practically throwing herself around his neck. I took an aggressively loud bite of my apple. Crunch. He shot me a dark warning glare. She trailed her manicured fingers down his chest. "I missed you so much." I stood up. I walked slowly over to them, taking another deliberate, agonizingly loud bite of my apple. "Darling, if I were you, I wouldn't get too close to those lips. I've accidentally seen his medical records. Let's just say a highly contagious rash is the least of his worries. The man is a walking botanical garden of exotic afflictions. And trust me, I'm not talking about roses." Dead silence. "What?" She trembled. "Oh yes," I nodded sympathetically. "A very active gardener." She recoiled as if she'd been burned. "Christian?" He glared at me with a look that suggested he was actively contemplating where to hide my body. "Get out," he ground out through clenched teeth. The model practically sprinted out of the office, her heels clicking frantically down the hall. Christian turned to me. He closed the distance between us with slow, predatory steps. "I had plans for this evening." "Not anymore, you don't. You don't even know what those plans were." "Oh, let me guess. A 5-star restaurant, vintage wine. She pretends to have a personality, and you pretend to be interested. And now you have a free evening. You're welcome." He took another step closer. "No, Vivian, now you do." I raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Excuse me?" He leaned in, his lips hovering just inches by my ear. "Far too close. You ruined my evening, which means you are going to compensate me for it. I am not your personal entertainment." "No," he murmured softly, "you are my problem, and I handle my problems personally." I could feel the space between us vanishing. This wasn't the pull of the magical leash. It was purely human gravity. He planted one hand on the desk beside my hip and the other on the back of my chair. I was completely boxed in. "Are you jealous?" he asked. I scoffed. "Of her? She has the intellectual depth of a decorative houseplant. So you're not jealous of her mind, then? Well, you don't have much of a mind yourself." He smiled, a real, devastatingly handsome smile. "You're lying." "I never lie. I simply analyze." His gaze dropped to my lips, slowly, lingering there just a second too long. "You are remarkably confident for a woman who is physically tethered to me by a 5-meter radius. And you are remarkably arrogant for a man who can't figure out how to get rid of a simple thief." He leaned in even closer. "Who said I wanted to get rid of you?" The corporate conference room. 3 gemstone dealers sat across the table. Their tailored suits were sharp, but their smiles were just a little too wide to be genuine. A velvet tray of glittering green stones rested in the center of the table. "Pure Colombian origin," one of them stated confidently. "The clarity is absolutely exceptional." One of the dealers slid the largest stone closer to him. "You are getting a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity here, Mr. Van der Berg." I couldn't take it anymore. "Oh, give me that." I snatched the jeweler's loupe right out of their expert's hands. "Excuse me, madam? That is highly sensitive professional equipment." "Exactly, which is why it shouldn't be in your hands." I held the green stone up to the light. I turned it once, twice. A sharp, mocking smile touched my lips.
You're holding those tweezers like a butcher wielding a meat cleaver, I stated coldly. This emerald is nothing but artificially treated glass, and that so-called certificate of authenticity was probably printed in somebody's basement. Christian, if you sign this contract, you are officially an idiot. One of the dealers choked on his spit. That is a very serious accusation. No, I countered. A very serious accusation would be a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for blatant fraud. I looked the lead dealer dead in the eye. The internal inclusions are entirely wrong. The faceting is clearly machine cut. The color saturation is far too uniform. This is a lab-grown tourist trap, gentlemen, not an 8-figure centerpiece. Christian slowly set his solid gold pen down on the desk. I believe this meeting is over. I casually slid the loop back across the table. You're welcome. He looked at me differently then. Not as a nuisance, not as a problem. He looked at me as an asset. You aren't nearly as foolish as you look, he mused. I have never once looked foolish. He chuckled softly. Maybe I should put you on my payroll, my own personal bodyguard against fraudsters. I don't work for hire. Pity. He stared down at the velvet tray of fake stones, a shadow crossing his features. Those were meant for a status bride. I turned to look at him. How breathtakingly romantic. A marriage of convenience, he replied flatly. Completely profitable, completely devoid of messy emotions. Just the way I like it. He shot me a brief, calculating sideline glance. You should probably look into finding someone accommodating. I know a few men in my circle who wouldn't turn their noses up at a ruined aristocrat, even a constant thorn in the side like you. The insult landed with absolute precision. Thank you for the profound life advice, Your Highness, but I would much rather be completely penniless and fiercely free than become a pathetic, wealthy lapdog wearing someone else's leash. I looked pointedly down at the invisible 5-meter tether between us, just like you.
We were stuck in gridlock traffic. Christian was behind the wheel of his Maybach, much too quiet and far too composed. A heavy, awkward silence hung in the air after our little chat about his status bride. Suddenly, my phone buzzed to life. The screen lit up with a name in large font, Michel. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Christian's gaze dart toward the display. I answered the call, making sure my voice dripped with a slow, exaggerated sensuality. Oh, Michel, I purred. Finally, I was starting to think you'd forgotten all about me. Yes, I know I'm demanding, but you know exactly how I like it. Nice and slow, very carefully. Christian didn't slam on the brakes. Oh no, he did abruptly adjust his rearview mirror. He reached out and snapped on the radio. A sickly sweet romantic ballad started playing. He immediately snapped it back off. Listen, about the size, I continued breathlessly. Are you absolutely sure it's going to fit? It was a bit too tight last time. No, I really don't want it to crack. Fine, just use oil. Lots of oil. Kisses, darling. Send me photos when you're done. I hung up the phone and let out a deeply satisfied sigh. Christian was staring rigidly at the road ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When he finally spoke, his voice was noticeably hoarse. Ahem, so you're having issues with size? I turned to look at him innocently. Massive ones. It's so incredibly difficult to find a professional who knows how to properly handle large, unwieldy shapes. He swallowed hard. And who exactly is this magician, Michel? Your personal yoga instructor? I burst out laughing. Michel? He's 70 years old, has severe arthritis, and wears glasses as thick as soda cans. He is the premier antique furniture restorer in Europe. We were discussing a Louis XIV chest of drawers. It simply won't fit through the doorway of my storage unit. I leaned closer, a wicked grin on my face. What exactly were you thinking about, you absolute pervert? He flushed. The arrogant billionaire actually blushed. An exclusive, invitation-only modern art exhibition. We were only here to oversee Christian's investments.
Standing right next to us was Madame Roche, heiress to something or other. She had a voice like grinding sandpaper and an ego the size of the gallery hall. She had been complaining about her domestic staff for 10 solid minutes. I took a slow sip of my champagne, my eyes locked on her wrist. A vintage platinum Patek Philippe. Such a devastatingly boring woman had absolutely no right to wear such a beautiful thing. I took a half step forward. "Oh, my apologies," I gasped, accidentally stumbling forward and grabbing her forearm to catch my balance. 2 seconds. Sleight of hand, pure magic without a single spell. "Watch where you're going, you clumsy girl," Madame Roche hissed, snatching her arm away. "You couldn't afford to replace the hem of this dress in 3 lifetimes." "I'm quite sure you're right," I smiled sweetly. We stepped away into the crowd. I felt the satisfying heavy weight of platinum settle into my jacket pocket. And then I felt Christian's gaze. He was staring directly at my pocket. Then he looked up at me. One dark eyebrow slowly arched upward. I froze. Great, here comes the billionaire's morality lecture. But instead, he stepped right up to me, positioning his broad shoulders to completely shield me from the view of the crowd. He leaned down, his lips brushing against my ear. "A Patek Philippe? Really?" he murmured. "I am simply collecting emotional compensation for having to listen to her voice," I whispered back. He let out a low, vibrating laugh. Slowly, his hand slipped into my pocket, resting warmly over mine. His long fingers brushed against my knuckles, sending a jolt of heat up my arm. "You have exquisite taste, little thief," he breathed. "But next time, take the diamond collar. It's worth significantly more." I looked up, stunned. He wasn't angry. He was genuinely turned on. I yanked my hand out of my pocket, wrinkling my nose in mock disgust. "Ugh, are you some kind of degenerate, Van der Berg? Does grand larceny actually excite you?" He calmly adjusted his perfectly arrogant cufflink, a perfectly arrogant smirk on his lips. "I am simply a patron of the fine arts, Vivian."
A cheap, neon-lit motel on the edge of the city. I needed an information broker. We were sitting in the Maybach, and Christian was angrily tugging at the collar of his thick black turtleneck. A billionaire playing the role of a hired thug. My legal team would be weeping right now, he muttered. "Oh, stop whining," I replied, casually touching up my red lipstick in the visor mirror. "I went with you to that mind-numbing art exhibition. Now it's your turn to work for me. We are physically tethered together, remember?" I remember perfectly well, but why am I dressed like a mobster from a 90s action movie? Because your custom Brioni suit would attract more attention in this neighborhood than police sirens. Now follow me, and try to look intimidating. Tonight, you are my attack dog. I stepped into the dingy motel room. Christian stood out in the hallway, leaving the door cracked open, hovering exactly on the boundary line. The information broker was a man named Bruno. He smelled aggressively of garlic and cheap tobacco. He snatched my envelope of cash, counting it before giving me a greasy, lingering once-over. "Such a pretty little bird," he sneered, licking his lips. "Maybe we can negotiate a different kind of payment." He took a step toward me, reaching out with a filthy hand. Crash! The door was practically ripped off its hinges. Christian stormed into the room, his fists clenched tight, his face a mask of absolute glacial fury. He froze. Bruno was already crumpled on the filthy carpet. I smoothly stepped over Bruno's writhing body and walked right up to Christian. I reached out, smoothly adjusting the collar of his black turtleneck. "Relax, tough guy," I purred. "Your boss knows exactly how to handle herself." A Michelin-starred restaurant, dim lighting, hushed tones, and astronomical prices. Sitting at the best table by the window were Christian and Eleanor, his flawless, freezing cold, contractually obligated fiancé. I had ordered a full dozen oysters and a crisp glass of Chablis, and I was thoroughly enjoying the show. "Your little escapades are negatively impacting the stock prices, Christian," Eleanor dictated, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "And this new,
shadow of yours. The rumors circulating are absolutely repulsive. I picked up a large oyster. I tilted my head back and slurped it down with the loudest, most aggressively obnoxious sound I could possibly make. Tell your escort to stop making those grotesque noises. She has the table manners of a dock worker. Just like her pedigree, the Lacroix family has been bankrupt for years. Christian slowly looked at Eleanor. He wasn't angry. He wasn't leaping to my defense. He was looking at her with overwhelming, soul-crushing boredom. He propped his chin on his hand and shifted his gaze to me. I deliberately picked up a second oyster, holding it up like a toast, and gave him a brazen wink. A faint, genuine smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Christian, Eleanor's voice climbed to a shriek. I am speaking to you. Are you even listening to a word I'm saying? Our social standing, our marital contract is boring, he interrupted quietly. What? Our contract is incredibly boring, Eleanor, he sighed. Just like this conversation. Ugly red splotches bloomed across her neck. She gasped, completely scandalized. How dare you? You'd rather entertain yourself with this penniless street rat. The wedding is off. Christian didn't even bother watching her leave. He calmly picked up his glass of vintage wine, stood up, and gracefully slid into the empty chair at my table. You just cost me a highly lucrative corporate merger, Vivienne, he muttered, though his eyes were dancing with amusement. Let's get out of here.
The city embankment. Christian was walking down the concrete steps toward the water's edge. The stone was slick with green moss and damp from the tide. One wrong step, splash. I blinked. The billionaire, the absolute terror of Wall Street, had just tumbled face first into the water. It was only knee-deep, but his $10,000 custom suit was officially ruined. I couldn't hold it in. I burst out laughing, clutching my stomach as tears streamed down my face, looking down at him from the top of the stairs. Very funny, Vivian. It's karma for your absurdly inflated ego. Stop laughing and help me up. The stones are slippery. Completely unsuspecting, I reached out and grabbed his hand. A violent tug and the dark water closed over my head. It was freezing. You absolute psycho, I shrieked. He was standing right next to me in the water. He was laughing, but his laughter died away almost instantly. My silk dress was completely soaked. The sheer fabric clung to my body like a second skin, leaving absolutely zero to the imagination. His eyes darkened instantly. The air between us suddenly grew thick. I needed to break this tension, urgently. Eyes up, Van der Berg, I scoffed, crossing my arms over my chest, or I'm going to have to charge you a viewing fee. He took a deliberate step toward me. The water sloshed around his thighs. You just cost me a highly strategic status bride, Vivian. Don't you want to compensate me for my losses? I waved him off. In your dreams, you ask for entirely too much. My heel slipped on a mossy stone, and my balance vanished. Christian caught me. His large hands clamped firmly onto my waist. His long fingers burned hot against my skin. I could feel his heartbeat beneath my hands, steady, powerful, and racing. I gathered every ounce of my willpower and shoved him away from me. Lifting my knees high, I wadded awkwardly back toward the shore. An underground, highly exclusive poker club. It was Christian's traditional Friday night. He was surrounded by his inner circle of billionaire magnates, and me, the involuntary accessory on a magical leash. Chris, seriously? Richard sneered, blowing a ring of cigar smoke. You brought a girl to the table? Shouldn't she be at the bar sipping fruity cocktails instead of watching the grown-ups handle real money? Christian lazily swirled the amber liquid in his crystal glass. She is very far from a proper lady, Richard. I felt my eye twitch. Oh, really? Is that how we're playing this? I stood up smoothly. I walked slowly around the velvet rope and pulled out the empty chair directly across from Christian. Deal me in, I told the croupier. Sweetheart, the minimum buy-in is 10 grand, smirked Richard. Does your little handbag even cost that much?
Without breaking eye contact, I reached up and unclasped my diamond necklace and tossed it onto the green felt table. Christian arched a single dark eyebrow, and then the faintest, proudest little smile touched his lips. The game began. For the first hour, they chuckled and made arrogant little bets. By the second hour, they were sweating. By the third hour, the table was dead silent, save for the sound of them nervously adjusting their silk ties. My fingers practically danced over the cards. I wasn't just playing poker, I was reading their tells and cracking them open like cheap, rusty padlocks. The mountain of chips in front of me grew to a staggering height. Richard swore violently and threw himself back in his chair. He was tapped out. Arthur tossed in his last 10,000, tapped out. It was just me and Christian left. He calmly pushed his massive stack of chips into the center of the table. Then he unclasped his solid platinum watch and dropped it on top. All in. I pushed my entire fortune, the chips, the diamonds, everything into the center. Call. Dead silence. The only sound in the room was the faint ticking of his watch resting on the green felt. Christian confidently flipped his cards over. Full house, Vivienne. Richard let out a massive sigh of relief on his friend's behalf. As Christian reached his hand forward to claim the pot, I reached out and covered his hand with mine. Skin to skin. He froze. With my free hand, I slowly flipped over my cards. 4 of a kind. I gracefully swept the mountain of chips, the diamonds, his platinum watch, and their wildly inflated egos into my designer bag. I stood up. Thank you so much for the game, boys. It was so grown up. Christian leaned back in his leather chair. I barely had time to exhale before he suddenly grabbed my waist and pressed my back firmly against the velvet wallpaper. 4 of a kind? Really? Is it painful to lose in front of your friends, Van der Berg? I whispered. He let out a dark, husky laugh. Painful? Vivian, I just sat there and watched you strip 3 billionaires down to their absolute underwear. That was, without a doubt, the sexiest thing I have ever witnessed in my entire life. We sat close on the plush carpet of his dimly lit office. Dozens of heavy, leather-bound books were scattered between us. Christian slammed his laptop shut, plunging the room into shadows. I still don't get it, he murmured, his dark eyes locking onto mine. You look at diamonds like they're lovers, so why risk your neck stealing a dusty wooden box? I don't care about the wood, Christian. I care about what it buys. I met his intense stare. The box was my ticket to the heart of the ocean, a flawless blue diamond. Why the obsession with stones? The space between us suddenly felt entirely too small. Because stones don't lie, I whispered. They don't pretend. They remember everything, while humans betray. A heavy, suffocating pause settled over the room. Christian's gaze dropped to my mouth. When you talk about them, his voice was a vibrating, husky rumble. Your eyes completely change. My heart did a violent flip, but I threw up my usual shield of sarcasm. Careful, Van der Berg. Keep talking like that, and I might mistake you for a decent human being. He leaned in closer, the scent of cedar and whiskey wrapping around me. And when you drop that exhausting, cynical act, you actually have a devastatingly beautiful smile. I froze. The air practically hummed. Is the great billionaire actually flirting with me? For the first time ever, he faltered. A flash of genuine panic crossed his eyes. He was used to using compliments to get women into his bed, but this had slipped out. It was terrifyingly sincere. He quickly cleared his throat, looking down at the books. I am simply stating an objective fact, Vivian. Right, I whispered, a slow, triumphant smirk touching my lips. Objective facts. Desperate to break the tension, he reached for a heavy archive. At the exact same moment, I reached for it too. Our fingertips brushed. Skin against skin. No magical shockwave from the leash, just a sudden, breathless shudder of pure, undeniable human electricity. He didn't pull his hand away, and neither did I. We need an expert. he finally managed, his voice dropping a full octave as if he'd forgotten how to breathe. There is one man who might know how to break this tether, but he only appears at elite galas. I slowly arched an eyebrow. Then I suppose we're going to a ball. We will have to play the part of a devoted couple to avoid suspicion, he warned, his dark eyes snapping back to mine. I leaned in, my lips hovering agonizingly close to his. Think you can keep your hands to yourself, darling? A wicked smile spread across his handsome face. His fingers tightened around mine. The real question is, Vivian, can you? I was the first to pull my hand away, because I knew with terrifying certainty that if I didn't break contact right then, the line between playing pretend and reality would completely vanish. Before the gala, he needed a new tuxedo shirt. We were in an outrageously expensive designer boutique. The moment we walked in, a young, overly eager salesgirl spotted Christian and practically lit up like a Christmas tree. "Oh, Mr. Van der Berg," she cooed, her voice dripping with honey. "Which color do you prefer tonight?" She stepped into his personal space, far too close. She began adjusting the collar of his shirt, her perfectly manicured fingers lingering on his chest. "You have such incredibly broad shoulders," she purred, practically batting her eyelashes. "This tailored cut really accentuates your physique." I was sitting on a velvet sofa behind them, flipping through a fashion magazine. I hadn't turned a single page in 3 minutes. My left eye physically twitched. She laughed at something he said, a high-pitched, entirely unnecessary giggle. Her fingers trailed up to his neck, resting there just a second too long. That's it. I stood up. I walked slowly up behind him, the sharp click of my stilettos echoing against the marble floor. I smoothly reached out and plucked the silk tie right out of her hands. "Darling," I purred, flashing her a lethally sweet smile. "You are going to suffocate him with that cheap floral perfume. I suggest you take 3 large steps back. He has a very severe allergy to synthetic fabrics and sheer desperation." The salesgirl blinked, entirely taken aback. "Excuse me? Who are you?" I stepped directly into Christian's space. I slipped the silk tie around his neck, my hands brushing against his collarbone. I slowly, deliberately began to tie the knot, looking up straight into his dark, smoldering eyes. "I am the one paying the bill," I whispered softly, making sure he felt the ghost of my breath against his throat. "And I am the only one deciding who gets to undress him tonight. So it's certainly not going to be you. Run along now." Dead silence. The salesgirl flushed crimson, spun on her heel, and practically sprinted behind the cash register. I gave his collar one final sharp tug. "This shirt is hideous, by the way." Christian leaned down, burying his face in my hair so only I could hear his low, vibrating rumble. "Did you just refer to me as your personal property before threatening a teenager?" "Shut up." I could feel his chest rumbling with a dark, satisfied chuckle. "You're jealous." "I am simply optimizing my breathing space. If looks could kill, you would have incinerated her on the spot." "She was handling high-value merchandise without proper gloves," I sniffed. He stared down at me. His gaze was heavy, heated, and far too pleased. "I really like this side of you." "What side?" "The fiercely possessive one. The one where you pretend you don't care, but you're actually burning up inside." I took a step back, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I don't pretend anything. I simply can't stand when cheap perfume ruins the scent of expensive cedar and whiskey." He laughed softly, a rich, dark sound, and I suddenly realized that this arrangement was becoming incredibly dangerous, not because of the magical leash, but because of us. The grand ballroom was a glittering sea of diamonds and silk. The orchestra was playing a sharp, pulsating tango. We were only here to hunt down the expert, but to blend in, we had to move. I was scanning the crowd when a suave, dangerously handsome stranger suddenly grabbed my hand, spinning me right onto the dance floor before Christian could even blink. I didn't even complete a single turn before a large, familiar hand clamped firmly onto the stranger's shoulder. "Graceful footwork," Christian said, his voice a freezing, aristocratic drawl. But cutting in without the escort's permission isn't just a breach of high society etiquette, it's trespassing. Christian's dark, soulless glare sent the stranger scurrying back into the crowd. Without missing a single beat of the music, Christian yanked me flush against his solid chest, seamlessly taking over the dance. His grip was completely uncompromising, one hand locked with mine while his other hand slid down my spine, his long fingers settling dangerously low on the curve of my hip, far below the line of polite society. "You still owe me, Vivian," he murmured, his breath hot against my ear as we moved perfectly in sync. "For what?" I whispered, feeling the hard line of his thighs against mine. "For my ruined engagement. You cost me a highly lucrative contract at that restaurant. I am still waiting for my compensation." "What exactly do you want from me?" I smirked, arching my back into a sharp dip. "Do you want me to find you a replacement bride? Because I know a stunning, imposing duchess, 65 years old, in the absolute prime of her life. She'd be perfect for you." He pulled me flush against him again, letting out a dark, vibrating chuckle. "I'm always open to new introductions," he purred, his thumb slowly, agonizingly stroking my bare skin. "Though I have already got my eye on a much more difficult investment." His gaze dropped to my lips, dark, hungry. The air between us practically caught fire. He leaned in, the music swelling around us. He was going to kiss me right there in the middle of 100 people. But I wasn't going to make it that easy. Just as his lips were about to brush mine, I used the sharp, aggressive tempo of the tango to execute a flawless spin, twisting lithely out of his immediate grasp. "Focus, Van der Berg," I whispered playfully, snapping back into his arms just as the song hit its final dramatic chord. I nodded toward a shadowy balcony across the room. "I think I just found our expert." I tried to slip out of Christian's arms to head toward the balcony, but he simply tightened his grip. With one swift, entirely arrogant tug, he pulled me flush against his chest again. "We aren't finished talking, Vivian. We have a slight 5-meter problem, remember?" I whispered, my palms braced against his tuxedo jacket. "Unless you want to be permanently glued to a penniless thief, we need to catch him before he vanishes." His dark eyes dropped to my lips. "Maybe I don't mind the leash." I scoffed, a cynical smile curving my mouth. "Don't get any ideas, Romeo. I'm not going to be another perfectly manicured doll in your collection. Men like you, hopeless, spoiled playboys, you bore me to tears." "Is that so?" he murmured, leaning in close enough for me to feel the heat radiating off his skin. "Then why is your heart racing?" I aggressively pushed myself out of his arms before he could see how right he was. "Let's go," I snapped, turning on my heel toward the moonlit terrace. We found the expert standing alone in the cool night air, an old, impeccably dressed man who looked at us with an infuriatingly knowing smile. I'll spare you the long, dramatic, mystical lecture he gave us. The short version? The box was a rare binding tether that latched onto profound imbalances between two people, whatever that meant. The old man handed Christian a heavy silver key covered in ancient symbols. But there was a catch. Of course there was a catch. The key wouldn't just turn in the lock. It would only work when the two of us were finally ready to let each other go, or, as the old man so poetically put it, when we realized we could no longer survive without each other. "Is that some kind of pathetic riddle?" Christian had demanded coldly. But as we walked away from the balcony, I noticed his knuckles were completely white. He was gripping that silver key far, far too tightly. We slipped out of the gala through a side door. The city street was dark, narrow, and completely deserted, until 3 massive shadows stepped out of the alleyway. I didn't even have a split second to react before I was violently shoved backward, my spine slamming hard against the cold brick wall. A thick arm pinned me in place, and the freezing, jagged edge of a switchblade was pressed directly against my throat. "The box," the thug growled, his breath reeking of cheap beer and desperation. "Hand it over, right now." I didn't move a single muscle, and neither did Christian. He didn't scream, he didn't lunge forward with his fists swinging like some reckless action hero. Instead, he stood perfectly still beneath the flickering street lamp, casually adjusting his solid platinum cufflinks. "Take the knife away from her neck," he commanded, his voice dropping to a glacial, terrifyingly calm temperature. The thug barked out a nervous laugh, pressing the blade just a millimeter closer to my skin. "Or what, rich boy?" Christian took one deliberate step forward. Not fast, just utterly, undeniably dominant. "Or I will personally buy your debt," Christian stated, softly, his eyes dead and soulless. Then I will buy your family's debt. I will even buy the debt of your miserable dog. And then I will systematically and legally crush your entire bloodline into dust. You are currently assaulting the companion of Christian Van der Berg. My private security team and the police will swarm this alley in exactly 30 seconds. I strongly suggest you run while you still have legs.
Total silence. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't threatened physical violence. He had simply threatened the absolute crushing power of the system, and somehow it was infinitely more terrifying. The thug looked at me. Then he looked at Christian's dead eyes. 1 second of hesitation. 2 seconds. In the distance, the faint wail of police sirens began to echo through the city blocks. The thugs swore violently, dropped their hands, and sprinted away into the darkness. I let out a shaky breath, slumping slightly against the brick wall. A thin, warm trail of liquid slowly trickled down the side of my neck. Blood. Christian saw it before I even felt the sting. His entire demeanor shifted instantly. The cold billionaire vanished, replaced by something dangerously dark and entirely feral. "He cut you," he breathed. "It's just a scratch," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. He closed the distance between us in 2 massive strides. Far too close. He slowly raised his hand. His thumb gently, agonizingly brushed against the side of my neck, right below the shallow cut. The pad of his thumb pressed lightly against my racing pulse. I physically shuddered. "Don't be dramatic, Christian," I managed to whisper, though my voice trembled. He looked down at the tiny smear of crimson on his thumb, and then he did something I completely, entirely did not expect. He leaned down. His lips brushed against my sensitive skin. Slowly, deliberately, he traced the delicate line of my throat, his tongue softly lapping up the thin trail of blood. The breath was completely knocked out of my lungs. My eyes fluttered shut. My hands instinctively grabbed fistfuls of his expensive tuxedo jacket just to keep my knees from buckling. His large hand slid down to my waist, his fingers gripping my hip so tightly it almost bruised, holding me flush against him as if he knew I was about to collapse. He pulled back, but only by a millimeter. His lips were still hovering just a breath away from my skin. I could feel the heat radiating off him in waves. "No one is ever going to hold a blade to your throat again." We burst through the double doors of his penthouse. The adrenaline from the alleyway was still crashing through my veins. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a wild, entirely unfamiliar emotion. I marched straight to his crystal cabinet, snatched a heavy bottle of whiskey, and took a burning swallow. "Give me that," Christian murmured, his voice dropping into that dark, velvety register. He stepped effortlessly into my space. The heat radiating off his body was overwhelming. My instincts flared. I planted my palms flat against his solid chest and shoved him backward. He lost his balance, tumbling onto the plush velvet sofa. And before my brain could even process what I was doing, I followed him down. In a heartbeat, my knees were pinned to the cushions on either side of his hips, my hands braced against his heaving chest, my hair cascading down to brush his jawline. We completely froze. Far, far too close. "You stepped in front of a blade for me," I breathed. "Why? Why would you do that? I'm just a thief, Christian." He stared up at me through the shadows. The cold billionaire mask was entirely gone. Slowly, deliberately, his large hands slid up from his sides, coming to rest on the bare skin of my lower back. The heat of his palms sent a violent electric shiver straight down my spine. "Because," he whispered, his thumb slowly tracing the curve of my spine, "you are the most intoxicating thing I have ever found." My breath hitched. "I am not a thing." Exactly. His fingers trailed a slow, agonizingly tender path up the side of my neck, right over the shallow scratch the blade had left. His touch was so unbelievably gentle, it made my chest physically ache. With a slow, heavy pull, he guided me down, burying his face in the crook of my neck.
I let out a soft, involuntary gasp as his hot breath ghosted across my collarbone. His lips brushed against my pulse point, once, twice. Not quite a kiss, but something infinitely more devastating. My hand slid up into his dark hair, my fingers tangling in the thick strands. I tilted my head down, my lips hovering just a single, agonizing millimeter above his. The air between us was so thick it was practically vibrating. He didn't close the final distance. He was waiting for me to surrender. And heaven help me, I was melting right into him. But right at that exact breathless second, a faint, pulsating light caught the corner of my eye. It was coming from his suit jacket pocket. The key. It was glowing with a brilliant, piercing blue light. The magic was reacting directly to the overwhelming, undeniable shift in our feelings. It felt like a bucket of freezing water had just been dumped over my head. I gasped, my eyes flying open, and violently shoved myself backward off his chest. "No," I stammered, stumbling until the back of my knees hit the coffee table. "No, we can't do this." I turned on my heel and practically fled toward the bedroom door. Christian remained on the sofa, his chest heaving. He looked entirely wrecked, frustrated, burning, and completely, utterly disappointed. "You're running away again, Vivian," he called out, his voice thick with raw, unchecked desire. I gripped the cold brass handle of the bedroom door, refusing to turn around. "I always run first, darling." But as I shut the heavy door behind me, leaning my back against the wood and trying to calm my violently racing heart, for the very first time in my life, I genuinely regretted it. The dead of night, I slipped out of bed like a ghost, snatched the silver key from his discarded jacket, and pressed it into the puzzle box. Click. A blinding flash of blue light, and then total silence. No magical leash, no burning pain. The bond was broken. Complete freedom. I grabbed my bag and headed straight for the exit, but just as my hand touched the brass handle, "Don't go," I froze. He didn't just speak, he closed the distance. Strong arms wrapped tightly around my waist from behind, pulling my back flush against his solid chest. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, his hot breath ghosting across my skin. "Don't go, Vivian," he whispered, his voice raw, completely stripped of his billionaire arrogance. "Whatever debt you owe, whatever you're running from, I'll pay it. I'll handle it." A sharp ache tore through my chest. This was far more dangerous than any magic. "I'm sorry, Christian." His grip turned desperate. "I'm completely serious." "And so am I." Slowly, agonizingly, I pried his large hands off my waist. I stepped out of his embrace because I knew if I stayed in his arms for 1 second longer, I would never be able to leave. The heavy door clicked shut, and I disappeared into the cold, empty night. The industrial shipping docks. The night air was freezing, thick with the smell of dark water and rusted metal. The shadow client was already waiting for me under a flickering halogen street lamp. "You're exactly on time," the client rasped from the shadows. "I am always on time," I replied smoothly. I pulled the heavy, ornate puzzle box from my bag and handed it over. The client eagerly popped the latch open. A heavy pause. His face contorted violently. "This is a forgery," he snarled. I frowned, genuinely confused. "What?" He flipped the heavy box over, furiously examining the lock mechanism. "This is a cheap, hollow replica. Grab her." My mind raced frantically. How? I never let the box out of my sight. I didn't switch it. And then, the sudden, infuriating realization hit me like a freight train. Christian. He had swapped the box. The arrogant billionaire had completely played me. Blinding police sirens shattered the quiet night. Headlights flooded the docks from every direction. Men in tactical black gear poured out of armored vans, weapons drawn, shouting commands as a police helicopter's spotlight pinned us to the asphalt. The shadow client and his henchmen were violently tackled to the concrete. 2 officers grabbed my arms, shoving me down toward the freezing asphalt. I gritted my teeth, preparing to unleash a string of highly unladylike curses at them. But suddenly, the heavy footsteps stopped right in front of my face. A pair of immaculately shined, outrageously expensive Italian leather shoes. I slowly lifted my head. Christian, looking perfectly calm, breathtakingly handsome, and completely unbothered. I did tell you that my legal connections were rather extensive, Christian smirked, holding out his hand to me. Get up, little thief. I glared at his outstretched palm. You entirely set me up. He grabbed my hand, pulling me up to my feet with effortless strength, yanking me far closer to his chest than necessary. I simply stole your problems, he murmured, his breath hot against my ear. And now it appears I've successfully stolen you as well. I let out a breathless laugh, shaking my head. You are unbelievably narcissistic.
Behind us, the police were dragging the shadow client into the back of a squad car. He was screaming that I orchestrated the trap. Christian didn't even bother turning around. He guided me toward the back of his sleek black Maybach. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off the noise of the sirens. The dim, luxurious leather interior glowed under flashing blue and red lights outside. He reached over and draped his expensive suit jacket over my shivering shoulders. How terribly romantic, I scoffed. Usually after a successful heist, I disappear completely alone. Usually you don't attempt to rob me. I didn't rob you, Christian. Oh really, you stole my sleep. You stole my self-control, you ruined my evening, and you stole my prize. And you swapped the box out with a fake. That is unbelievably petty, even for a billionaire. It was a highly calculated strategy. His hand slid smoothly from my shoulder to the curve of my waist. So, you calculated absolutely everything, then? Almost everything. What did you fail to calculate, Van der Berg? His eyes dropped to my lips. You. Silence filled the car. Outside, the cold blue police lights continued to flash. Inside, the air was suffocatingly hot. So, are you planning to have the commissioner arrest me? On what charges? For stealing my heart? Unfortunately, that is private property. Ugh, that was aggressively cliché. Then let me phrase it differently. I leaned in, my hands flat against his chest. You completely set me up. I saved your life. You are a terrifyingly arrogant idiot. And are you finally going to stay? A heavy silence. Instead of leaving, I grabbed a fistful of his silk tie and yanked him down toward me. If you ever refer to me as your problem again, I will ruin you, he breathed. Then what exactly are you, he whispered. Your absolute best mistake. I've always loved high-risk investments. Our lips crashed together, not cautious, not polite, not gentle, starving. His hand clamped around the back of my neck, pulling me flush against his chest, while my fingers tangled in his dark hair. The kiss wasn't a question, it was a demand. Outside, the officers very deliberately looked the other way. I pulled back just enough to whisper against his mouth. I did warn you, Christian. I steal anything that isn't nailed down. He laughed, a rich, intoxicating sound, and pulled me back in. Then you had better hold on tight, little thief. And for the very first time across 2 different lifetimes, I finally understood something. Sometimes the greatest prize isn't stealing a priceless gemstone. Sometimes it's stealing the man and keeping him entirely for yourself.